So today we're starting out with one of the most favorite things in the world. Dave, I mean apple pie. One of my favorite content creators, Dead on Dave, you might know him from the Copious Kingdom, made an apple pie recently. And although he did an okay job, there's a couple of things I wanted to go over with him in order to make sure that he gets the finer details when it comes to baking an apple pie. With that, let's dive right into it. So we're starting off with the apples. The one thing I already kind of noticed when Dave was doing this is he cut the apples before he peeled them, which is fine. It's just a lot more work to do. So I'm not going to do that. I'm lazy. I like to do things that with the least amount of effort. So first off, wash the apples, and I'm gonna show you two different ways of peeling these before we cut them. So I've washed my apples. I'm basically dry dabbing them with a piece of I washed my apples, and I'm now basically just dry dabbing them with a piece of kitchen toilet, because you don't want them wet. It's gonna in fact affect how you can actually cut the apples. So first off, now Dave, I know you've been an army man. Me personally, not really, but my father used to be. So I know you know how to cut them like this, with just ever so slightly breaking the skin, and then slowly cutting it out. Now that's gonna take a while, but if you master this, you actually have a lot more apple to work with in general. Now I'm gonna just use this like fine cutter. It's easier. I'm a lazy man. You can see it almost makes the same cut. It cuts a little, ever so slightly deeper, but you kind of want to keep as much of the skin that's just barely intact underneath the outer skin, just to make sure that you can actually, the vitamins are actually stored the closest to this part of the skin in that regard. So I'm just cutting these apples now with this fine peeler, and you want to keep it as close to the skin as possible, because most of the actual vitamins, save for the meat, are actually concentrated around the skin. It's what makes the skin have its outer layer, along with the fiber that's weaved into that, in that molecular structure. Anyway, I'm forwarding this. Now, as you're peeling these, you got to keep in mind that it's very important that you do a thorough job on this first peel before you cut them in pieces, because as Dave so elegantly demonstrated, you kind of get stuck with a lot more work. So I'm just hammering that home, because I know that Dave is about as lazy as I am when it comes to, organizing your shit and getting things done, which is fine. I mean, life only deserves as much effort as you put in. But by the same notion, I do like tasty things, so I prefer it if I do it in as lazy a way as possible. So just speeding this one along. Now this is actually a very, very nice piece of equipment to have. I am very much a hands-on man approach when it comes to these kinds of things. You gotta keep in mind, the thing is, the more of the basic elements you create, the more eventual say you have in how the flavor turns out, which I'll highlight with a couple of things later on in this specific upload. But it's basically my fundamental to everything. What's the classic and how can I somewhat improve it at least to my specific taste. Because you don't want your cooking to be boring. You want it to be special, memorable, and specifically, you want to have people like basically say, because to me that's like the best thing that people can say to you next to I love you is, oh, I ate so much. I ate too much, but it tasted so fucking good. I mean, come on. What kind of cook doesn't want to get that specific compliment? I mean, we're all dreading the, I don't necessarily like it that much as a cook. So you try to do the things that taste good to you specifically, but also kind of help your own sense of flavor and challenging yourself as well, because I'm doing a couple of things in this one that's not necessarily your basics, but are very much things that give room for experimentation. So I'll highlight those specific things when I get to those steps. Anyway, I'm gonna finish up these apples, and I'll see you right after the cut. Get it? The cut. Now, make sure as you cut the apple that you cut it in half, then quarter it. And this is quite an important, easy thing. Normally you're learned whenever you cut away from yourself. Don't do it. Not in this specific case. You need the actual control within your thumb to differentiate in the pressure. If you don't, you kind of end up with not a hollowed out piece of apple. So you do that for every apple involved. You can kind of feel it when you're cutting out the apple core, the sensitivity, the amount of pushback you get from trying to push your knife through it. Well, people scolded me for this one last time, so I think I'm gonna amp up the game. These are actually very sharp knives, to the point where like even this specific part cuts your fingers if you don't necessarily wield it well. But as you can see, as soon as you do that, it gets a lot easier. I do want to highlight that I specifically don't necessarily like sharper knives for cutting this part out, because like I said, just the feedback you get from how much pressure you need to apply to the knife actually shows you where you're still hitting the core and where you enter the meat of the fruit, to be exact. Well, anyway, I'm cutting these down further. Wait, that actually might get me copyright struck. That's not. Oh no, that's classical music. So that's one of the other things I've been like wrestling with. Like I've been trying to find some good copyright-free music. The first tracks that you've grown so much to love and then throw up over because I endlessly looped it behind it was courtesy of Abby Blackbird. If you don't know her, go and subscribe to her. She's a doll. She's been a bit controversial in the past, but she and me have been ride and die from the start. So you won't hear me say a bad word about her in that regard. I really like cooking. It really like, it centers my brain around the one activity. Well, say for the apple that I just dropped. I'm gonna wash that in a second. There we go. At least it wasn't like a utensil this time. There we go. So I'm gonna clean the cutting board here. This is actually not the surface of my bar. It's a separate piece of wood that I can clean up and clean out afterwards, because it's not bad if you get a bit messy during cooking. I personally always get a bit messy during cooking. Well, as long as you're not like a head chef or anything, you can actually just, there you go. We're going to cut that out, I hope. Last apple part. So for the specific recipe I'm using like 1 kilogram of apples, which on average is about 4 solid apples of this size. Important to highlight when making an apple pie is it's made or breaked. It's make or break regarding the type of apple you use. If you use like an overly sour apple, you're never gonna get like the yield of return of the amount of effort you're putting into your pie. You really want to kind of go for either a full sweet or like a half sweet, half sour hybrid. I choose in this specific case because I'm gonna add something that's gonna sweeten the overall taste of it later with its own unique flavor. I opted for L-Stars, which is decent. It's your average, it's your most commonly used apple for an apple pie over here. Now I want to cut these fairly small, mostly in not specifically as big of pieces, he says, as he fully cuts down one in perfect pieces. All right, so you've got two specific pieces of apple cutting that you can do in order to get some control over the flavor. The bigger the pieces are, the more concentrated the taste of the apple will end up in the end product. For me, on a personal note, I tend to slice and dice like 2/3 of it and just do 1/3 where I try to slice them in the length. I'm going to show you in a second. I'll pick this one. So you actually specifically over the length of the apple, and you want to keep this one as thin as you can manage, because these are going to be part of the top layer. Now you don't have to do this. I just like to challenge myself with those kinds of little things, and I do them because I know they highlight the overall flavor just a little bit better. Then again, with everything when it comes to cooking, like your mother's cooking is always going to taste best, unless you got food poisoning from her. But it might just all be between the brain, but in my specific opinion, and when I pointed out to people, it tends to really be the little things that nudge something you bake, something you made, from being normal to extraordinary, if you get what I'm saying. It's just that little thing that sticks to people's minds. Like, I've got a little sister. My little sister really always, when she comes to visit for coffee, grown-ass woman, by the way, she always comes in like audibly sniffing to smell if I've been baking something, because I tend to do when I get people over. I just like, you know, doing that little bit of extra for people. So I'm gonna highlight cut this, so I'm gonna do the rest off camera. I showed you the two different types of ways, and I'm gonna show you what it will end up in. So as I, start ending the cutting, I realized that because I've got like two different kinds of cuts, that I'm probably, if I didn't figure this out before I did it, I would have probably like thrown all the apple in with the rest, which is fine. I mean, different shapes and all that kind of stuff, and different kinds of it concentrates the sugar and the cinnamon that we're gonna add later differently. But basically my point is, even if you find these kinds of things, like I really enjoy just cooking. It's fun for me to feed other people. It isn't my job, which makes it more of a hobby, which in general makes it more relaxing than it does like performative or stressful, more or less. So as you keep an eye out, because even the slightest nick will make this recipe go a bit red, so I don't want to do that. Now take your time with it, make sure you do it right. So, right, we got these lined up for the different bowl. Let me get a different bowl. So we're gonna start. I've got like this little oven bowl here, just so I can close it off, because Dave actually did that in the most easiest and most correct way possible. So here's where I'm going to deviate from standard recipe for a second. I am going to add vanilla sugar instead of your normal sugar to this specific mix. And there's a specific reason for that. So, except for the other parts. Like, vanilla is a very good sweetener in general. So this is about like 48 grams of sugar. I need 50 for the recipe as a whole. I've got like 8 grams, a little bit more over there. Now you can definitely just use normal sugar, but you got to keep in mind that the sugar is kind of what makes this part of the recipe taste differently. So you've got your granulated sugar, you've got your fine sugar, you've got your sugar with, we call it bastard sugar, which is basically your more brownish sugar, which now that I say it out loud sounds a hell of a racist. But anyway, you see we've got this in here. We're gonna add these to it, and it's gonna fit. I decide that it's gonna fit. Gotta fit it all in there. Come on, little bits and pieces. It's a snug fit, but we made it work. Gotta keep in mind, chef's prerogative. You can always taste the goods. Now, this has always been kind of funny to me. Like for some pieces of a recipe, they specifically mention like grams and stuff like that. But then all of a sudden they go over to spoons, like I'm asking myself, why specifically do we do two different types of measurements for that? Is that something with the whole European British thing. There we go. Now you gotta remember, in some aspects cooking is actually quite an exact science when it comes to mixing your proportions, but by the same notion, it's only going to taste ever so slightly different if you don't get the measurements correctly in the moment. Now we shake this. Because it's transparent, you can actually just kind of make out how good it's taking over all the apples. A little bit more. Make sure you really get the shake into it. Because the more they're covered, the more it actually binds with the structure that's in the juices that are in the apple. It's why cinnamon, like I grew up with cinnamon, apple and yogurt in my family, and it was so fucking good. I don't know if I can say that like this far into a YouTube video, but I guess I'm good. Anyway, last piece of shake. There we go. Now, since I'm doing 2 bits, I'm gonna drop this one in here for now. I mean, come on, look at that. That is brilliant. Now, there we go. So we're gonna set this one aside for now, and we're gonna do our second batch with just our top pieces. We've got the vanilla sugar over here. I'm gonna show you just ever so slight differences in how they matter when it comes to cooking. So, based on the amount of apples that I have over here and the amount I used already over there, I'm just gonna add like a rough spoon of not too much. And then I'm gonna, as you see, I put it in the same half this time, and that's mostly because of the way the apple actually is layered out. There we go. Now, you don't have to get as detailed over this as I do. I just like very much to be precise. So in between like cooking sessions, like the last time I made this apple pie, I made it ever so slightly different in the details. I did it with just a slight different preparation, and that's kind of where most of the fun of it comes from for me. It's more or less, we're gonna shake these a little bit more gentle because we don't want them to be too, there we go. We basically don't want them to be too broken up into pieces, because the sugar that binds it actually makes it more heavier. So with making it more heavier, it also kind of ruins the break sometimes, as in it snaps in two. And since these are the ones that we want to do on top, it's got to be, you know, as intact as possible, if I have a say in it. Now these are a little bit less brown, and that's with a purpose, because when you eating shit before you start talking, bad habit. There we go. These are going to be on top, so they are going to lose most of their moist So if you leave more cinnamon on these than you do on the other ones, you basically get that the taste intensifies to a point where it's not actually tasty anymore. So we want to prevent that. Now keep in mind, I did one different thing with these apples, which was basically specifically adding vanilla sugar to it. I like vanilla. It's mostly because it adds to the flavor as well as sweetening it in general. So this is the last piece, at least for where it contains the fillings. These are actually raisins. I put them in some room temperature water, and I added some vanilla extract. And the reason for that is because I want them to suck it up, and then as the pie bakes and becomes more baked, you basically lose a lot of that moist, but it starts spreading out throughout the pie evenly. Now, when you do this, don't wash them afterwards. This kind of beats the purpose. It's supposed to suck itself up with the essence, and if it does, and if you start like just straight up washing it out, you actually wash a lot of the taste off of not only the surface of the raisin, but also what's inside. So I've drained them now, and I can actually smell the vanilla coming out of them. So I'm gonna add these to the stuffing one. Shake them through each other. You don't necessarily need to hard mix these in. And then you get like this sweet sense of cinnamon, kind of a sugary vanilla, and the apple coming in through your nose, and it's amazing. I can't recommend this little tweak enough. So we're gonna get into my main grievances with Dave now. Dave, King, please never, ever do the bottom like that. Don't buy a pre-made pie bedding, whatever you call it in English. You can add so much to the flavor of the pie with the way you make the crust. The crust was the word I was looking for. Anyway, so I'm gonna make this from the basics because it actually tastes better, and you have like more of a say of how you mix it into the whole form. So I do use just your standard bottom crust mix from the shop. I'm not that much of a purist, but come on, prefabricated pie bottoms, really. I mean, can you imagine how dense and spongy that must taste? You're not supposed to do that with apple pies. Anyway, so I added the butter there. Got one egg. I had one egg over here. A bowl. Just one egg. You don't need any more, because you're basically adding this for overall coloration on the end product, but also just as a slight binder for the pie bottom. Why do I keep getting the feeling that I'm saying that wrong? But probably because I am. Anyway, just slightly, ever so slightly mix it up to the point where it's an even yellowy orange. Just as you're scrambling you would scramble your egg. Now what this is going to do for the end product, it's going to give your pie that little bit of extra brown coloring that you associate with just in general good taste. Now we're gonna get into the whole part where it's gonna get a bit sticky again. because I've got my butter here and I need to mix it up with this first. And as you mix it, now normally I'd use gloves if I actually made this pie for somebody else, but this one is going to be all me. I'm gonna have such a nice dessert for the rest of the week. Alright, so now that we've got this basic crumbling in, so you want to start binding it all together ever so slightly. We're gonna add in the egg. Now, don't do this normally. I'm just an idiot sometimes who doesn't think I. Now you're gonna see it really start binding together fairly well. It's gonna get more sticky. I can actually feel it be more sticky. I don't know who just messaged me on Discord, but thank you. Now what you want for every kind of dough basically is you want it to become like a whole thing. Like one coherent mess, evenly. At some point you need to stop, just squeezing the bread and start rolling it together more. And as you can see, like I said, it's okay to make a mess. Just don't make a mess. And make it then harder to clean for yourself. Which is basically what I try to prevent to do. Not always succeeding as much as I could, but sometimes life requires you to get a bit dirty. There we go, starting to really look up. Got some, there you go. Roll more of that in there. Now, the thing is, because this looked like really powdery when we started, but as long as you just keep at it, you can lose despair sometimes and think, oh, I need to add more to it. Don't. The recipe knows what it's doing. Trust in the recipe, just do it as the recipe tells you to. And if you know enough about it, you know where you can deviate from the recipe or in the way you prepare it. But for a first time, second time, hell, even up to the 5th time, I just recommend the base recipe. So there's a lot more effort into this one. Now what I could do is I could add something to the bottom, to what's going to be the crust. I'm not going to do that specifically because I've got enough extra things going on, and at some point the recipe starts to feel overcomplicated in terms of flavors. You want to have your flavors in there, but you want them to be connected in a specific way, either by contrasting the other flavor or by highlighting parts of the other flavors, but you still want it to taste differently from spot to spot, specifically with the pie. So for instance, the sugar in here, there's going to be apple in here, there's going to be cinnamon in here, and I added vanilla to it. I added the vanilla because it basically bridges those two without necessarily ruining the overall flavor of what apple pie is supposed to taste like. I've got a little bit left here. Can roll that one up, roll that one in. This too. There we go. All right. And we're back. This brings me back to last week's episode. All right. So, we've got a dough here. I'm going to use its form to pick up the last bits and pieces that I have laying around the board here that fell off, kneading it back in through the overall dough. There we go. You want it to look, in terms of color, consistent. You don't want to see specific flakes. And ideally, when you pinch it like this, you shouldn't see like dry bits and pieces or too much cracks forming. If you got that down, then in general, your batter has been like mixed up enough. I use strange words. People are going to make fun of me for that. Oh well, fuck it. So we've got this. I'm gonna use the butter over here. Got a little bit butter left. This one was near room temperature, this butter, but it gave me a bit more hard time because it wasn't exactly room temperature. This one's been out of the fridge for a couple of hours, so it should be a lot closer. We got this. Now this is what we use over here, and you might have it over there in America, or chances are this was actually made in America. But you can just add it to here and just start rubbing it in. You want a nice glaze going on. Now I've seen people do this with a spatula, which is fine too. Just try to use something that's a bit flexible to a spatula is not the right word. A thing you use to empty up your bottles and your pots. I don't know what the name is in English, but it's basically a tool with like a soft end that flexes, but by the same notion, because of the way it is made out of plastic. Obviously, most of these things that are flexible are made out of plastic or rubber. So now I got to the point where it's actually, you can see the buttery stripes run there, and we're gonna finish this off. Now keep in mind, like with a cake that has no exterior surface, you actually need more butter, because in order for it to have a more clean and consistent break, you need to have more moist and heat be able to form between the outer layer of the cake and the tin it is contained in. Now, personally, I don't dislike a good solid, undercrust, but the highlight of every apple pie, obviously, is going to be the upper crust. So the part that actually covers the rest of the apple pie. So as you can see, I'm using my hands. There's other tools you can use. Now I'm gonna be sure. I'm gonna show you. I actually give it like this little extra push towards the corners, because with the way this spring works, you actually get a lot more consistency out of the outer layer, because it's snaps loose. So if you got one of these, I highly recommend them specifically for baking pies, because basically these are amazing to use. Now that I've covered the whole base, I'm gonna slowly start working my way from the inside towards the outside of the edge of this baking tin. I'm gonna slowly but surely try to stretch it up, push it up, stretch it up, push it up. You know, like slowly building up the dough without spreading it too much. Like for instance here, I just over stretched it. Now you start mixing, matching. This over here. Anyway, this specific piece of content kind of got motivated purely because of Dave's apple pie something. I love Dave. I've done his time. He was like the first man I did my timestamps for. I kind of got out of the loop due to his content schedule upload and mine in real life work schedule kind of starting to differ too much to be able to actually timestamp all of his shows. So I kind of felt bad. But in this way, I can show my teacher that he might be the copious king, but you should let the baking just go to the chefs, you know? I'm gonna make it today. Now, what you want to try and do is make the crust like ever so slightly curl up towards the end. That will give you that classic look. There we go. Little piece left. We're gonna cut this one into long pieces for later. Now what we're gonna do, we're gonna basically just add everything. So we've got our baking tin here, making sure the bottom is well and truly covered. There we go. Then we start adding in this. It looks, tastes, it smells great. I can only imagine how it's gonna taste. There we go. There we go. Start spreading that out. There we go. You want to keep a bit of the crust away as much as you can. Spread the raisins around as much evenly as you want. There are some situations, like I know people who don't like raisins in their apple pie, which is fine. I mean, it's not necessarily a mandatory thing, but you can add so much more flavor by doing it. I mean, just using the raisins, for instance, I use the raisins towards year's end with Christmas. When I make a dessert, I tend to make this apple pie, and I just like let the raisins rest in rum, so you get rum raisin apple pie with a little scoop of ice next to it, and some good whipped cream as like your dessert. So we've got this set up here. Now we've got our little apple slices, and I'm gonna try, let me see, can you see? No, you can't really. I'm gonna try and lay them out one by one. There we go. As much as I can to cover the top. I think I'm just gonna fast forward this because this feels like a pain. Last piece. So, one thing, I had some extra dough lying around, and I wanted to use that to make those classical stripes that you put on top of the pie before you bake it. I ended up not having quite enough to do that though, so I opted to reinforce part of the outer layer so I can get more of a crust in there. Now, this has been binding in terms of sugar, cinnamon, and the apple juices. Don't forget the raisins. To one like amazing kind of coherent but taste which highlights all the individual parts of it. I'm gonna shove it into the oven now, and I'm gonna make some whipped cream to go with it, using some more vanilla sugar because basically, I want to stick with the theme. So I'm gonna show you guys how this ended up.
So, as I'm saying here, I'm showing off the new pie as it comes out of the crowds from the oven, and as you can see, I'm very happy with the way it looks. It's got the whole spring thing with the spring there, and you can see the cake and the cake crust came out perfectly with about no effort at all. So I don't really get why your problem was with this, Dave, but fair enough, to each their own, I guess. So I'm gonna talk over myself now. I could narrate it, but basically, as I'm saying, this turned out quite the way I wanted it to. Now, I'm highlighting that how the way the tin works, basically, when you remove the crust, the only thing you really need to worry about is to see if the bottom in itself hasn't turned soggy, which in general doesn't happen when you have your own bottom crust for it. So, I'm really looking forward to tasting a piece, as I do here. Don't do this before you offer it to other people. It comes across as nasty, kinda. Anyway, so still feeling a bit antsy here because I really hope that the bottom doesn't give out as I try to lift it from the thing. And we're going back now to me when I figure it.
Alright, so I've packed in the pie in aluminum foil just to keep some of the moisture in when it cools down. As you can see, there's like all kinds of little condensed on there. Let's see. Yes, this looks good. Now you can choose to cut it like this, which I am going to do, but I want to show you that it is actually fully free from the bottom of the plate. So I'm gonna cut this. I'm gonna give you guys a nice look at how it ended up. There we go. The ever so slight nudge. Look at that. I mean, how much more amazing do you want that to look? With that ever so slight hint of vanilla through there. So Dave, to summarize, pretty decent effort, never fucking skip on the crust,
challenge yourself to be a bit more creative. And overall, GG. You are the king, but let's leave the cooking to the chef, alright?
Well, hello. You are a pie I want to get into. Anyway, that does it for this week's upload. I really love Dave, so send him no hate, even though he technically committed crimes against pie. I subscribe to his content. I've been a long time watcher and an avid timestamper of him in the past. So shout out to him, and thank you for having some content I could react to. Next to that, a special shout out to all you people who've been so supportive of my first 2 uploads and are willing to stick it out with me to improve everything. I think I did a very good to decent job with just getting the new microphone in general, but I'm also looking into what kind of different things I can do in terms of the format of the content and what a weekly upload schedule would look like. So anyway, special thanks to Peepaw, Siley, Badwick, Maggot, Purple Paw Prince, and Blackbird. I mean, you know the regulars. Thank you a lot for your vocal or non-vocal support of this content, and thanks to you, I kind of really want to get into it. So there's a couple of more things that I'm looking to improve on. As you might have noticed, like the recordings behind this camera are a lot clearer. That's because this is a newer camera. This is actually inside of my monitor. But by the same notion, I'm not going to drag that monitor over from there to here every time. So I'm going to look into getting a new webcam as well. Other things. Oh yeah, I'm looking into getting some like channel unique music. I've been mucking about with copyright-free music, but I really just want something that reverberates with the general vibe I want to go with better when it comes to my uploads. I'm going to do some banner art as well. I've got one more piece of content lined up already that I'm going to release in like next week, at the start of next week I think, because I got a new coffee maker. Some of you might have already seen what happened with the older one, but I've been drinking a lot of coffee and I need something more sweet, and I recently stumbled on a recipe from a content creator that made sweet tea, so I'm gonna try and reproduce that. I've never done sweet tea before, for the record, so I've never tasted it. We only have the cartons over here, so I'm curious how that's gonna taste, but that's gonna be a little less critical and more, what's this? How does it taste? Do I have any suggestions? Anyway, thank you again for watching. Tune in next week and I'll keep making this content better because I really am enjoying this. So thank you a lot again for your vocal support, and I'll see you again next week when you get to see what I'm cooking in the kitchen.